I watched Marlene Kessler's smile freeze on her face when the deputy walked into the Briar Hollow clubhouse, looked straight at her, and said, "Ma'am, please stand up." And she tried to laugh it off like she always did, like rules didn't apply to her. But then the cuffs came out, and the room went so quiet you could hear somebody's keychain jingle. Yeah, that happened, and the craziest part is, it didn't start with some big dramatic crime scene. It started with a folded piece of paper jammed into my mailbox at 6:03 a.m., telling me I owed $6 because my grass was supposedly too tall. If you've never lived under an HOA, you might think I'm exaggerating. You might think this is one of those. No way. This is real stories. But I swear to you, it was my actual life for months, and it messed with me in a way that's hard to explain until you've had someone micromanage your home like they own your front porch. My name's Ethan Parker, and a couple years back I moved just outside Raleigh into a cookie-cutter neighborhood called Briar Hollow because I was tired. Not in a poetic way, just tired. Tired of renting. Tired of landlords acting like basic repairs were a personal favor. Tired of feeling like I couldn't settle anywhere without someone changing the terms on me. So I scraped together a down payment, bought a modest place with a small yard, and told myself finally, I'm going to have peace. The brochure for Briar Hollow talked about high standards and community pride, and I figured that meant the HOA handled the pool keys and maybe sent out an email. If there was a storm coming. You know what I mean? I didn't picture a grown woman with a clipboard patrolling the sidewalks like she was running neighborhood border control. The first day I moved in, I was carrying boxes up the front steps when I heard this bright, too cheerful voice behind me. Welcome to Briar Hollow. And I turned around, and there she was, Marlene Kessler, mid-50s, tight blonde bob, pearl earrings, blazer that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle holding a clipboard, like it was an extension of her arm. I'm Marlene, she said, eyes flicking past my face, straight into my garage. HOA president. We keep things nice here, and I laughed because I thought she was just being friendly in a slightly intense way. And I said, Great, I'm Ethan. And she smiled without warmth and went, Just make sure you don't put anything permanent on the porch without approval. And I remember blinking like permanent. It was my porch, but whatever. I shrugged it off. I was new. I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot, so I played nice. 2 weeks later on a Tuesday, I stepped outside half awake with a coffee mug in my hand to grab the mail. And I see this crisp, official-looking notice shoved into my mailbox like a parking ticket. Violation notice. Fine. $650 reason. Grass height exceeds 2.5 inches. Immediate compliance required. And I just stared at it for a second, like my brain was buffering. Then I looked down at my lawn and let out this weird little laugh because my grass looked like every other lawn on the street I had mowed that weekend. It wasn't a jungle. It wasn't even long. It was just grass. Boring suburban grass. I took photos like a maniac from the curb, from the porch. Close-up is wide shots. I emailed the HOA management office as politely as humanly possible. I received this notice I mowed recently. Can you clarify the measurement and the date and time this was observed? And I waited. Nothing, not even a "we received your email," not even an automated reply. Just silence. That afternoon I got home from work and saw Marlene walking up my driveway like she had an appointment with my front door clipboard in hand. Sunglasses on the full vibe. And I said, Hey Marlene, I got a fine this morning, but I think it's a mistake. And she didn't hesitate. Didn't even pretend to consider it. She just said, No, it's correct. And I said, I mowed on Saturday, and she shrugged like that was irrelevant information. It was measured this morning, and I asked, "By who?" And she goes, "Our compliance team." Like that was some elite unit. And then she hit me with, "You have 48 hours to fix it." Or the fine doubles. And I remember standing there thinking, fix what? "Marlene," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "the grass is already cut." And she tilted her head and smiled sharper and said, "Then it should be easy. Keep it under 5 inches. And then she leaned in a little and lowered her voice like she was giving me advice. Some people don't understand how we do things here, and she walked off my driveway like she'd just done me a favor. That right there, that was the first moment I felt the power thing, the enjoyment behind it, because it wasn't about grass, it was about control. And once you see that in somebody, you can't unsee it. I tried to handle it the normal way, like an adult. I called the HOA office, left voicemails, emailed again, with the photos asked for an appeal. And finally, I got this template email back that basically said, "Fine stands. Pay within 10 days to avoid additional fees. No explanation, no proof, no human tone. Just pay up." 10 days later, I get another notice, $250 for trash receptacle visibility, and I'm thinking, what does that even mean? I pull my trash bins in the same night like everyone else. I'm not out here decorating my driveway with garbage, but they included a photo. And it was this grainy shot of my bin taken from this weird angle, like someone crouched behind a bush to snap it. And that's when it stopped being annoying and started feeling invasive. After that, it was like she found a rhythm, like she enjoyed it. $400 for unapproved window covering color, which was hilarious because my blinds were white, just plain white. Blinds, the default blinds of America. Then another one for vehicle alignment, claiming my car was parked outside acceptable driveway boundaries, and I'm looking at my driveway thinking, did my driveway get smaller overnight? Like, am I hallucinating? The money added up fast. But honestly, it wasn't even the money that got to me. It was the way she made it feel like I didn't belong in my own home, like I was constantly one mistake away from being punished. And it does something to your head. You start noticing every little thing. You start second-guessing yourself. You start walking around your house like you're a guest. The worst night was when she knocked on my door around 7:30 p.m. Not alone. She had this guy with her in a security polo shirt standing slightly behind her, like she'd brought backup, and she spoke loud enough for the street to hear. "Mr. Parker, we've had complaints," and I said, "Complaints about what?" And she held up another notice like she was serving me papers. "Vehicle alignment. Your car is consistently parked outside the acceptable driveway boundaries." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me." And she smiled that thin smile and said, "It's not a joke. If you can't comply, there are consequences." And then she dropped it. The thing that wasn't about rules at all. She leaned forward and said, "Some people don't belong in communities like this." And there it was clear as day, not subtle, not hidden behind policy language. Just a woman telling me she could squeeze me until I left. I shut the door and stood there with my hand on the knob, breathing hard, feeling small in my own living room. And I hated that feeling, not just because it hurt, but because I could tell she expected it. She expected me to fold. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced. I replayed her tone, her face, the way the security guy didn't even look comfortable being there, and finally, I did something I normally wouldn't do. I went and knocked on my neighbor's door. 2 houses down lived Trey Collins, retired firefighter. big friendly guy who always waved. And I hadn't known him long. But I knocked, and when he opened the door, I didn't even get a full sentence out. I just said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" And he looked at my face and goes, "It's Marlene, isn't it?" And I swear, I almost laughed from relief, because for the first time I realized I wasn't crazy. This wasn't just me being sensitive. "Yeah," I said, and Trey leaned against the doorframe and told me. "She's been doing this for years. She picks someone and leans on them, sees what she can get away with." And I asked, "Why me?" And he shrugged. "New guy. You don't know the game." And I said, "What game?" And he lowered his voice and went, "Those fines don't always go where people think they go." And my stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" And he said, "Request the financials. Just do it. You'd be surprised." And that sentence lit something in me. Not rage exactly, more like clarity. Like my brain stopped spinning and found a handle to grab. So I looked up the rules for HOA record access in North Carolina, wrote a formal request letter, sent it certified mail, and I asked for the last 12 months of financial statements, vendor contracts, and the ledger showing where compliance fines went. And of course they dragged their feet. Because people like Marlene count on you getting tired. They count on you wanting peace more than you want justice. But I had crossed that line where peace was already gone. So what was I protecting by staying quiet? When the documents finally arrived, they were sloppy and half-organized, like they assumed nobody would read them. But I read them line by line late at night at my kitchen table with a highlighter and a legal pad, like I was trying to solve a murder mystery, except the weapon was a clipboard. At first it was just numbers. Dues, landscaping fees, pool, maintenance, nothing exciting. And then I saw a recurring line item. Administrative consulting services paid monthly to a company called Kessler Compliance Solutions, LLC. And I felt my pulse in my ears because Kessler, as in Marlene Kessler. I flipped pages, looked for context, looked for board votes, approvals, anything that made it make sense. And all I found was more payments, more fine collections, and a clean little pattern where every time fines spiked, payments to that LLC ticked up too, like a faucet turning on. I just sat there, staring at the name until my eyes burned, because it was right there in black and white. The rules weren't about standards, they were revenue. And she wasn't just policing the neighborhood, she was making money off it. My first instinct was to confront her, but Trey's voice was in my head. Don't play her game. And the second instinct was fear, because once you realize someone is running a racket, you realize they might not stop at lawn fines if you threaten their income. And I'm not saying she was some mob boss, but people with power and ego can get reckless when you corner them. So I called an attorney. Michael Brantley, a guy Trey recommended, and he looked at the documents and did this slow whistle and said, "This is not just petty. This is serious." And I asked him what I do, and he said, "We do it the right way. Quiet, clean, documented." And he told me to keep everything to communicate in writing, to record interactions legally. And he said something that stuck. People like her bank on intimidation. The second you show you're not afraid, they start making mistakes. And I held on to that like a lifeline. We filed a formal dispute, demanded a hearing, and requested that the board disclose conflicts of interest, and right around then, I asked for an agenda slot at the next HOA meeting, because if I was going to do this, I wasn't going to do it in whispers. I wanted sunlight. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse looked like a middle school auditorium before a talent show packed, buzzing people standing along the walls, because word gets around fast when the neighborhood villain might finally get checked, and Marlene sat at the front table with her board members like she was holding court blazer on perfect hair that practiced smile like nothing touched her. When they opened the floor, I stood up and my legs were shaking. Not because I was scared of her, but because I knew once I spoke, there was no rewinding it. "Hi," I said. "I'm Ethan Parker." Willow Bend and Marlene cut in immediately. This is not the time for personal grievances, and she waved her hand at me like she was dismissing a waiter, and I took a breath and said, "Actually, according to our bylaws, it is," and I saw a couple people sit up straighter because they weren't used to anyone pushing back. Marlene's smile tightened. "Proceed," she said, dripping sarcasm. And I did. I talked about the fines, the grass, the trash bin photo, like it was taken by a raccoon with a camera, the blinds, the vehicle alignment, the nighttime visit with a security guy, like I was some threat to national stability. And I kept my tone plain, almost boring, because I didn't want drama. I wanted credibility. Then I said I requested the financials, and her eyes flicked just for a second toward the treasurer, a tiny crack in her mask that told me I was walking on the right nerve, and I held up the documents. "This is the ledger. These are the fines collected. And these are payments made from HOA funds to Kessler Compliance Solutions, LLC. And the room went dead quiet like a movie theater when the twist hits, and everybody realizes they've been watching the wrong character. Marlene leaned forward, voice sharp. "That's confidential." And my attorney stepped up, calm as ever. "It is not confidential. Homeowners have the right to inspect these records, and what's documented here appears to be a conflict of interest at minimum." And Marlene laughed. "But it was thin. You're accusing me because you can't follow simple rules." And I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "No. I'm accusing you because your personal LLC is receiving HOA money after you fine people." And then I asked the question that made her blink. "Marlene, why is your company being paid with our money?" She tried to pivot. "Administrative services are approved." And from the back, someone spoke up, a woman I didn't even know. Arms crossed, approved by who you? And then it started, one person after another. Not screaming. Just finally talking. She fined me $900 for holiday decor. She threatened a lien over a mailbox. She stalked my driveway with a camera. Stories stacking building, and you could see Marlene's face shifting from anger to panic like her brain was calculating exit routes. And then the double doors at the back opened, and 2 deputies walked in, with a man in a suit holding a folder. And the air changed, because when law enforcement steps into a room that's been ruled by ego, suddenly ego looks small. The deputy looked at Marlene and said, "Marlene Kessler." And she sat up taller and snapped, "Yes, and who are you to interrupt a private meeting?" And the deputy didn't blink. "Ma'am, please stand up," and she tried to laugh. "This is harassment." But her voice wobbled just a little, and the man in the suit read from the papers about allegations of financial misconduct, conflict of interest, falsification of records. And as he read, Marlene's smile didn't just fade. It froze, like her face couldn't process the idea that consequences were real. She looked around, like someone would defend her, like the room had owed her loyalty. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even her board members stared at the table. And when the cuffs clicked, it was loud in that silence, clean and final, and her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a slap that felt symbolic in a way I can't even explain. As they guided her toward the doors, she twisted her head back and hissed at me. "You think you've won." And I didn't feel like a winner. I felt tired, and steady. And I said, "I think you're accountable." And she spit out louder now, like she wanted the room to hear her last line. "You have no idea how many people wanted this. Neighborhood kept the way I kept it." And that sentence landed like a brick, because it wasn't just a threat. It was a reveal. It was her reminding everyone. She didn't operate alone. She had fans. She had people who liked order, as long as it targeted somebody else. After she was gone, the suited man handed the remaining board a notice about freezing certain accounts and interim management, and people started whispering and doing that shaky little laugh you do when something stressful ends and your body doesn't know what to do with itself. And on paper, yeah. It was satisfying. Prince paused. Accounts reviewed. Homeowners finally asking questions. It looked like justice. But here's the part I didn't expect. And this is where I want you to lean in a little, because this is the uncomfortable truth. A week later, I started noticing neighbors who used to wave now looked away. Conversations got short. Smiles got thin, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Not an HOA rule, a social one. And I realized Marlene's power didn't come from nowhere. It came from people letting her do it. People benefiting from it. People liking high standards when it meant someone else was getting squeezed. You know what I mean? And that's why even though I'm proud, I pushed back. Even though I sleep better, now that I'm not waiting for a fine over the angle of my trash can. There's still this weird tension in the air sometimes. Like some people think I didn't just expose corruption. I exposed a mindset they were comfortable with. And that's a different kind of conflict. Quieter, but real. So here's my question for you. And I mean it, because I've gone back and forth in my own head about this. Was I right to take it public the way I did? Or should I've handled it quietly and spared the neighborhood the chaos? And bigger than that, how many people saw what she was doing for years and called it keeping things nice until it landed on their doorstep? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want the debate. Tell me where you draw the line between standards and control, between community pride and bullying with paperwork. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, a power-tripping neighbor, a boss hiding behind policy, whatever it is, share it, because I'm telling you, the fastest way these people win is when everyone stays quiet. And the second everyone talks, the whole thing starts to crack.